Hello and welcome to Daddy Issues, the podcast where we talk about father and son relationships in popular culture. Last week, Sean Connery died. We had mixed feelings about it, so I'm here with David Bryan today to talk about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Dave, how are you doing?
I'm great, Dom. Nice to see you. I'm really enjoying how frequently we get to talk to each other now with this lockdown thing going on. This whole lockdown thing, I don't know if you've heard about it.
Well, depending when the 15 people who have listened to this are listening to it, either Joe Biden is now the president of the United States, which he has not been. We're still waiting to get that confirmation through. You may be out of lockdown, or you may not be. So, depending on how hopeful you are for the future, either President or dead President Biden is in power. And it may be 3 years later and we're all still in lockdown. But
yeah, depends how efficient we are on the post-production part of this podcast.
Yes.
We're not the most reliable.
Yeah, God. Well, also, this hell is stretching on forever. There's that weird time warping thing where the election results stuff in America was Tuesday, Wednesday morning. And now it feels like it's been 10 years since they tried to decide who the president of America was going to be. Yeah. And it's the same with lockdown as well. With lockdown, it feels like we've been in it since Thursday, but it feels like it's never ended. We've forever been trapped down. So this is Lockdown 2, November 2020. What's happened? And then Sean Connery died.
Last thing we needed.
yeah, it's on my list of last things I needed in 2020. Number 17 was Sean Connery died.
Yeah, and it's only an 18 long list, so
yes, yeah,
you've got all the way down.
Oh God. Well, this seemed like a great movie to pick up as we kind of stumbled upon it during our recording last week of a father-son relationship. Is The Last Crusade a movie that you grew up watching, or is it like one that you kind of just came upon later?
Actually, I came upon this one later, but I did remember did watch Raiders of the Lost Ark a lot when I was a kid. That would go on constantly, and I'm sure I probably saw this one once or twice, but nowhere near as many times. And I don't think we ever watched Temple of Doom as a kid because my parents were
scared of monkeys.
Not scared of monkeys, scared of mad voodoo witch doctor kind of people who rip hearts out through people's chests. And that's not the kind of thing my Christian parents were particularly keen on showing to their children.
Well, it wasn't like it did a favourable image of the voodoo witch doctors. It wasn't like you were going to be seduced into taking up the voodoo practices.
Yeah, this looks fun. This might have all the answers, you know.
Oh, Kalima.
Okay. It makes sense.
Now bring me the dog.
No.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was younger, I definitely watched Raiders and Last Crusade the most. Temple of Doom is just slow. I think it's got its pros and cons, but as our culture becomes more and more critical of the way things were perceived in the past, I think Temple of Doom is going to be the one of these three movies that kind of gets swept under the rug a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Someone's going to have to apologise for it at some point. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they probably should. It's particularly for I know the female character in that movie. I don't remember who it was, what the character's name was. She just says "indie" in a high-pitched squeal all the time. And I'm basing that off of the Family Guy parody of Temple of Doom and not an actual memory of the movie. But I don't imagine that with a modern lens is particularly appropriate. I can't imagine it being made now, that's for sure. And I think I was reading that the female character, the main female character in Last Crusade was a kind of a reaction to how they used a woman in the second one and how she was what the reaction to her was.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to The Last Crusade then. So the reason we're talking about this is, of course, because Sean Connery passed away last week, and this is a classic father-son adventure movie with Sean Connery as Henry Jones to Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones. despite the fact there's only a 12-year difference between the ages of the actors, they are playing father and son. But there's only 12 years, but I completely buy it. There's never a point in this movie where I'm like, well, he didn't even have pubes before his son was born.
No, I would not have guessed that. No, like, it's completely believable. Either Sean Connery looks older than he really is, or I think it's probably that, actually, because I was looking at Sean Connery's filmography, and it was only a matter of a few years before this that he did his last Bond film. So what was that? Never Say Never Again in 1983. This comes out in 1989. So only 6 years has gone past for him being like young and suave, and well, I guess he was kind of middle-aged, but he didn't look like an old man. And they make him look like a granddad somehow, or he makes himself looking like a granddad in this one.
Yeah, that's the weird unofficial Bond movie, I think. That one,
is it?
Because it's after Roger Moore and George Lazenby and that group. They made like an unofficial one, like an unlicensed Bond movie with Sean Connery back again as James Bond.
Yeah, just to bring him back.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the one where he pretends to be a Japanese person.
Oh, speaking of things we shouldn't talk about or be swept under the rug. Never to be
I'm pretty sure. I think they give him like Vulcan eyebrows.
That sounds weirdly familiar, actually, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and he's in the Japanese sauna with his very hairy chest. And it's maybe we have to check this out, but never talk about it. But yeah. So I guess that's a good place to start with this. Do you believe the father and son relationship between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in this, as father and son?
Yeah, absolutely. I buy it from square one. And as we just touched on, I'd seen this film a few times probably in my lifetime, but I didn't remember much of it, especially at the beginning. I was watching it kind of with fresh eyes, but what struck me throughout is how good this film is. It's brilliant. There's very few flaws I could pick out and things that I would have done better or anything like that. I thought it was great, and obviously the key part of that is the relationship between the father and son. And I know that was a big drive for Spielberg, and probably with George Lucas too. And the other one, there's the three guys.
Yes.
I know that the story was by Lucas and some other dude, mystery man, obviously directed by Steven Spielberg. So
Jeffrey Boehm,
thank you very much. So I know that when they were thrashing around ideas for what the third one could be, I know there was talk of Indiana Jones with ghosts in a haunted house, and there was like Indiana Jones and something else kind of that sounds lame in retrospect. And then when they went for the Holy Grail, they thought that was a cool idea, but there wasn't much spectacle, and not like the Ark of the Covenant. Like that kind of was the real set piece that defined the movie in Raiders of the Lost Ark. This needed more, and I think they really wanted to explore more about what Indy's character was, more of his history, and more of what made him who he is. So they had to put a lot of depth and weight onto that relationship, and I think they really pulled it off, both with scripting, casting, performance, and Spielberg being a master filmmaker, he puts it all together pretty nicely.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's one thing I noticed about this movie that I hadn't really noticed before, but it does not let up. Like the action scenes in this are 5 or 10 minutes each one, and it's really weird watching it in comparison to the way that you have like action or adventure movies now, where it's like okay, you've got a 2-minute action scene and then we cut for 10 minutes away from action and then you'll come back again. Within this one, it's like they just keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
It's like every time they're trying to escape from the Nazis or something, it just keeps going and going. It's like first there's guys on motorbikes, then they cross through the border, then there's an aeroplane, then they get off the aeroplane, they're on the beach, and it's just keeps like it's that. I think it's the Spielberg kind of action where each action scene builds on itself, right? So it's not just like a car chase. It's like, okay, there's a car chase, and then and then it builds up and up and up. Like, I think the best example is the tank chase in the desert at the end, where they're just viewing, they're just there watching the tanks, but then it gets ambushed. So in the ambush, Indy goes to try and rescue his father, but in trying to rescue his father, he ends up chasing the tank on a horse. Then he loses the horse and he's on the tank. Then he's hanging off the edge of the tank on the barrel. And they're going to crash him into the wall. Then he gets back up on the tank, gets his dad out, but then the tank's out of control and he goes off the edge of the cliff. It's like 15 minutes. It's like a 15-minute action sequence. And it's full of tension and emotion, and it's brilliant. It's just so much thought and care put into that action scene, rather than just cut into the interior of a car. Dominic Toretto moves it up another gear. You thought there wasn't another gear in the car,
gear,
but there bloody
gear,
is.
Gear.
Yeah, and it's not just an actor sitting on a soundstage going, okay, now look upset. Okay, great. Now something scary is going to happen, right? It's like they've actually put Harrison Ford on the edge of this tank, bashing him into a wall.
That's actually him.
Crazy.
I know. I think what's the guy's name? The legendary stuntman who was his stunt double. And I think the coordinator for this. Is it Vic Anderson? Viv Anderson's a footballer. I can't remember his name. Or something like that.
Maybe it's the same guy.
Could be. He was. Harrison Ford was so keen to do all of his own stunts that this guy, who is a legendary stuntman, one of the best in the business, a legend, had to kind of go, hey, Harrison, do you mind if I do one? Because he was just stood there letting Harrison Ford do all the work. And I think I read that he said if Harrison Ford wasn't any good as an actor, he would have been an amazing stuntman. He just wants to do it all himself. And the bit where he's dangling off the barrel of the thing, and looks so sketchy, because that's a real rock, and that's, at least a piece of large machinery that's on the other side of him. And I know there were like stage hands like shoveling dirt in his face from above and all that stuff. Yeah. But that's such a great sequence, as you said, and another great example of that ramping up the peril and the action onto action while progressing a story, is where he goes to rescue his dad from the castle. And you think that they go through all these hijinks, they get captured, and then they escape, and I'm sure we'll go into more detail because it's so much fun. But then they get out of the castle, and I know that, again, in researching this, the script originally was called for that to be the end, and then there was just like talky bits. I'm guessing as Indy and Dad. What's it, Henry? In all my notes, I kept calling him Dad. Maybe we'll get into the psychology of that. With Indy and Henry are in the motorcycle, maybe that was just going to be dialogue. But then Spielberg was like, "Why don't we just keep it going, but make that into a chase sequence?" And that's one of my favorite sequences, especially for some of the dynamics between the two characters.
Yes.
Because it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and I think maybe that's part of Spielberg's enduring legacy, something he just does better than anyone. And I don't know, I haven't watched, to be fair, and to be honest, I haven't watched many of Spielberg's more recent films, but through the 80s and 90s, he was the man for adventure, for like family-friendly adventure movies, even if it had a lot of action. And he could do it in a way where the action never got too adult, too perilous, too graphic. It was fun, even though like stuntmen and bad guys here and there being exploded and going through these heinous crashes. You never once go, oh, that was a bit much. And they kind of disguise a lot with explosions. Do you remember the scene in Venice, the boat chase?
Yes.
And they're going through between two large tankers, and Indy's like, I said don't go between them, and she was like, I thought you said go between them, and he was like, I said don't go between them. And they obviously just get through in the end, but then the bad guys, they get crushed, and for some reason the boat that they're in, the little boat that gets crushed between two larger boats, explodes. And I was thinking at the time, like, without that explosion, what you would see is men being crushed into pieces or like getting decapitated. So the inappropriately large explosion kind of just disguises that. It's like, and the bad guys, let's just say that they're dead, and we can carry on this fun adventure. Kids are loving it, parents are loving it, and that's kind of Spielberg's jam. I think the last film I
Yeah,
can
I
remember
think
watching of his like that was Tintin, which I don't know when was that, 2003 or something.
yeah, yeah. I think a really good example of that kind of action sequence outside of these movies, which is where I think he's perfected it, but is Velociraptors in the kitchen in the first Jurassic Park,
Yeah.
where that scene with the kids and the Velociraptors just builds and builds and doesn't let up, and then they get out of the kitchen and you think, oh, thank God, they found Dr. Grant again. They're going to be okay. But the Velociraptors aren't going to stop just because the adults have arrived. Right? Like, as a kid watching that movie, you see the adults appear and you think, oh, well, those children will be safe now because the adults are here. But it's not enough. It's not enough to keep them safe. And that action scene just keeps going and going, and really holds that tension, which is Spielberg. There you go. This is welcome to Spielberg issues, where we.
Yeah.
I think the relationship between Indy and his dad is really, really special and unique, and kind of, as you said before, is 100% the heart and soul of this movie. I was trying to think of a comparative father and son relationship within movies like this, and the only one I could think of is Ben Stiller and Dustin Hoffman in Meet the Fockers, where you have this protagonist and they love their dad and want their father's approval, but also they're horribly embarrassed by them. And that's part of the relationship with Indy and his dad, is that Indiana has... It feels weird calling him Indiana. Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones. Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
Indiana Jones,
yes,
right? That
yeah,
one.
yeah. If you know the correct Indiana, yeah. Indiana Jones is we realise is completely following in his father's footsteps in everything that he's done with his life, except for he's also become an action hero, which plays into some of that father and son dynamic. But Sean Connery's Henry Jones is a professor of medieval literature. So Indiana Jones becomes an archaeologist and follows in his father's footsteps. And we see at the beginning of the movie where young, amazing River Phoenix is playing young Indiana Jones. His father makes him count in Greek, and we know this is where he's got his amazing skill for like translation, and we get a lot of that back and forth between them, especially like those similarities between them as it goes on.
Yeah.
But Indiana Jones is very frustrated by his father, and is frustrated in the way that his father is an old man. And it's like the number of times where he's like, Dad, like that, right? Where it's just like, come on, like, well, you stop hanging around. This is important. You're not taking this seriously enough. And there's not many father-son relationships like that in movies that I can think of. I don't know if there's any other examples that you can think of where the son is so frustrated that their dad isn't taking things seriously enough.
I can't think of any other examples top of my head, no. But it did strike me how Indy does treat his dad like the sidekick of the movie, like the bumbling kind of psychic character. And the only time they kind of connect is when they are talking about academic things. So the scene where we first kind of see them interact, when Indy rescues his dad from the Nazis in that castle, and
he gets hit over the head with the vase.
He smashes him over the head with the vase, and the vase. Why are we saying vase? He gets smashed over the head with a vase. Ming Dynasty, 14th century or whatever it is, and before even recognizing that his son is here and that he just smashed him over the head with a vase. Damn it! I had to kind of catch myself there. His first instinct is to check, is to go to the light and have a look at this vase and be like, oh, that's a damn shame. And then he realizes, and then you feel when Indy kind of comes over and is like, by the way, you just smashed me over the head. Hi, I'm your son. Nice to see you. and
Yeah.
Dad kind of softens, Henry kind of softens, and then you realise it's just because he realises that vase is fake. It's like, don't worry about it, it's just fake, that's fine. Oh, and
Yes.
by the way, sorry about your head. Like, Indy is a complete secondary thought. And you do see that parallel when they start talking about their history. There's a great scene I'd like to get to in more detail later on the Zeppelin, where they finally sit down in a calm environment and they can have a conversation. And I think that's a really key part of their story. And I really enjoy that. But it's interesting what you're saying before about how what Henry is, what his profession is, and the life that Indy chooses for himself academically. He definitely follows in that footstep to some degree, but he has this kind of split personality, as we all know. Indiana Jones, part sort of scholar, lecturer, historian, part action hero. And we get to see in that sort of prelude prologue bit at the beginning of the movie with young Indy, he models himself on this adventurer character that he bumps into, who's much more of like a prospector kind of character, who will dig up or steal artifacts for monetary gain. He just wants to sell it to some rich guy who wants it for his collection or whatever. He's not interested in preserving history in the way that Indy has been raised to. But it's interesting in that prologue that Indy is so concerned and will put himself in danger as a child in the face of grown men, criminals by the looks of them, with weapons, for the sake of, it belongs in a museum.
Yes.
When we finally see, when we get Indy getting home to see his dad when he's young, his dad doesn't give him any affection, doesn't give him barely any attention. But it's interesting that Indy is so eager for that and for the approval of his dad. I think what he wants to happen is he bursts through the door, says, "Here, I found this cross artifact thingy. Some guys were using it, and we're just going to sell it to the highest bidder. But I've got it. I'm going to put it in a museum." And he wants his dad. He wants to have that conversation for his dad to say, "Well done, son. You followed in my footsteps. I've taught you well." But really, he just goes, "Stop. Count to 20. Like in a really condescending, like you'd say to a 5-year-old who bursts into the room too excitedly. And when Indy must be like, 16 or something at this point?
Yeah.
And do it in Greek. So it's not only putting him down immediately, he's also testing his intelligence. So perhaps that's why we see Indy's split personality. Is that he is undoubtedly his father's son, but he has no reason to like his father. He likes the life, even the clothes, the outfit of this outlaw kind of character. And it kind of informs his whole life from that point on.
Yeah, I think that's a really key moment. And those two, the count to 20 moment with River Phoenix at the beginning and the hitting over the head with the vase are the two perfect introductions to their relationship and to Sean Connery's character as well. Because in that opening bit, we don't actually see Sean Connery. We don't see his face, at least. He's over the desk, kind of in darkness. So he doesn't come across as being a human, likable character in the same way that even the bad Indiana Jones, the evil Indiana Jones, at the beginning, because they're shown in the bright, like the desert sunlight. We see them on the train. We get a full picture of them. We get to know who they are, but Indy's father is still shrouded in mystery, and that's kind of a great visual demonstration of their relationship.
It's dehumanizing, isn't it? Like without a face, he's not a person. He's just a...
Yeah, and he's not there.
Yeah, he's an absent stereotype kind of placeholder figure of a father.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so then when he does have that moment with the hats, where the guy gives him the hat, you're right. We see more of the, this is what I'm going to become, but I'm going to be the good version of this. It would be like, I don't know, if Darth Vader gave Luke Skywalker the lightsaber and then Luke Skywalker said, "I'm going to be like you, but good." well, maybe that's a different father-son relationship, but he bases himself off of these two
sort of diametrically
masculine,
opposed masculine
yeah,
figures. Yeah. So
yeah,
while the less traditionally masculine one is his father, who's an academic and would fight with his brain, the more traditionally masculine one is
like a grave robber.
Is kind of on the dark side of morality. Yeah, that's kind of intriguing, and it's when from that moment when the evil Indy hands his hat to this nipper and was like, "I like you, kid. You've got spunk."
You got moxie.
You've got moxie. Yeah.
It's like I think he says you lost today, but that doesn't mean you have to like it.
Yeah. So
something like that, which is a cool line. Like, you lost, but you got moxie, you got spunk. Like, don't give up. I see something in you, right? It's like, I see your potential, is what that line means.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, his father won't even look at him.
Yes.
His father is in the other room, and when the police and these criminals burst into their house, his dad doesn't even leave the office.
Doesn't even stand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the approval that he seemed, actually thinking about this now, the approval that Indiana Jones seems to be seeking is that of the adventurer guy from the beginning. He mentions later that like when he came of age or whatever you want to say, when he became an adult, he left, and they've barely spoken for 20 years when we're in the sort of the present day of the movie. He hasn't sought the approval of Henry Jones Sr. He's not been speaking to him about his academic prowess, which maybe he would think that his dad would approve of. He's been living a life which this mysterious stranger would have approved of, and kind of gave him the inspiration for.
Yeah.
So maybe he might see that man more as a sort of spiritual father than his actual dad.
There must have been a big temptation for the writers to not bring that character back for later in the story. Like, I know they use that introduction to set up the hard cut to the boat off the Portuguese coast, where he's as an adult, he's retrieving the same crucifix that he lost as a child, as a teenager, and he fights the man in the white suit to get it back all those years later. But we don't see evil Indiana Jones again. He doesn't come back. And the temptation must have been huge for them to go, okay, the movie is going to be Indiana Jones versus evil Indiana Jones with his dad. And, he's being pulled in both directions, right? Between his dad on the good side of it belongs in a museum, and the evil Indiana Jones, who, wants to go on adventures. But they just forget that character. You never see him again.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. What would you do with him if you were rewriting this and you wanted to bring evil Indy back? How would you structure that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would. I think they made the right decision by leaving him out, because otherwise, this is something I want to come on to later, which is the conflicting legacy of this movie for me. I think while I was watching it, I said to you, this movie ruined all of modern cinema. Something along those lines. And I want to get into that to more detail, because there's something I noticed in this where I was like, oh my god, this film is the death of... Like, Star Wars is a perfect example. But yeah, deciding to leave out evil Indiana Jones from later on, there's not a confrontation between evil Indiana Jones and Sean Connery, where Sean Connery is like, I'm the boy's real father. Like that. There's nothing... he's just gone from this movie. If we jump to the Zeppelin scene that we were talking about earlier on,
yeah,
that's a really brilliant moment. Indy and Henry have escaped from the castle. They've found out they were both boning the same Nazi.
Yep.
And which is again just a brilliant moment with how did you know she was a Nazi? She talks in her sleep.
She talks in her
or something
sleep.
like that.
Apparently he answered that.
Yeah.
Sean Connery made that up on the spot, and they had to cut straight away afterwards because the whole crew and cast were on the floor laughing. And apparently Spielberg went, "Well, that's staying in."
Yes,
isn't it? It's the perfect line. Like, I think that question was left open in the original script. Maybe it was just going to be answered with a sort of a raise of the eyebrow, or he was going to look shifty and sort of embarrassed. But I love how he took the character in a direction of, no, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And there's a bit when they're talking about that on the Zeppelin, where Indy's like, "You're old enough to be her grandfather, for Christ's sake," and he's like, "You say I'm as human as the next man. I was the next man." There's this great little back and forth dialogue that I really like. But then that funny little tete-a-tete then goes into Indy kind of opens up to him, and if we're talking about this, I wrote it down. Right, I wrote down this back and forth.
Okay, are you playing both roles?
I'll play both roles because I haven't shared this with you. I thought about doing that beforehand, and we could have done the voices and everything.
Well, you're going to have to do the voices because otherwise, how am I going to know which Jones is which?
Well, my Sean Connery is not very good. So
it's perfect. I'm in. I'm all in.
It takes a lot of effort, and I think it would take away from the feeling of the scene. Interesting side note: the interior of the Zeppelin was filmed on a set, and apparently it was really hot. So both Harrison Ford and Sean Connery were not wearing any trousers while they were filming this scene. They were sat there in their pants. Which
I'm going to go and rewatch this.
So maybe we should. Okay, let's take our trousers off.
All right.
To be fair, I am baking. I'm sweating in this room today. Okay, I'll read you the scene.
Okay. Interior.
Should we?
Zeppelin.
Yeah, interior Zeppelin. I can't think of many other scripts that would have that scene heading. Do we need to set the scene? So we mentioned about Indy rescuing his dad from the castle. That's like kind of the Austria-German border, Salzburg, I think it is on the map. That amazing trope that was invented for these. Is it invented for these films, or at least made famous by the films, where to transition from scene to scene and showing us where they've travelled, they have a map sort of in translucent on the screen with a plane and a little line. Oh, I love all that.
It's great.
It is. So Indy escapes the castle with his dad, and they decide, instead of trying to find Marcus Brody, their ally who they've given important pages of the diary that's going to help them discover where the Holy Grail is. He's in where is he? Somewhere in North Africa, because he meets up with
Egypt.
Jonathan Rhys.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it must be Egypt because they meet up with Jonathan Rhys Davis.
The Welsh Egyptian.
Yeah, as I called him while I was watching this, Mo Salah, because his name is Salah. And I was like, he's Egyptian, his name's Salah. So he's there. And then they decide, though, that instead of going to find Marcus in Egypt, they're going to go to Berlin, where the evil Nazi woman has Sean Connery's diary, which Indy thinks is not important, but Sean Connery's like, it's bloody well important, we're going to need that later. Those kind
and they meet Hitler.
And they go to Berlin. They accidentally bump into Hitler. They get the...
As you do.
As you do.
Of course. I read that guy who plays Hitler, that was the third time in his career that he played Hitler. And that's just not a good typecasting to have, is it?
You have typecasting of all kinds of things. Like Jonah Hill played like the chubby funny one, because that's what he thought all he could really do. And I know that the woman who played Elsa, the Nazi lady in this film, she got cast as like Aryan evil women over and over again after this film.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, poor guy, Hitler over and over again. He might as well just be a lookalike and hire himself out for birthday parties at this point.
Well, that's what I always wanted as a child at my birthday parties. My parents said, "Do you want a clown? Do you want..." No, I want a lookalike of Hitler. So we can play... Yeah, we can play pin the tail on the dictator, and you
pin the mustache on the dictator.
No, that's a good one.
There we go. We just figured this out.
It's a very small landing strip to get it on accurately.
That scene as well, actually, another interesting piece of trivia from that scene. When all of the extras were doing the Nazi salute and goose stepping, Spielberg had them all put another hand behind their back and cross their fingers.
So that they didn't mean it.
So that they didn't mean Sieg Heil.
Aww.
Which, that's kind of really sensitive of him. He wasn't like, it's just a movie, guys. Chill out. He was like, make sure, we cleanse our souls by making sure no one thinks that we're being serious about all this Nazis, Sieg Heil stuff. It's a film set, I know. All the costumes, by the way, were real. There are real uniforms that were reclaimed after the Second World War. All the Nazi costumes. Yeah. Anyway, so Indiana, he dresses like a Nazi, gets into this kind of like Nazi festival where they're burning books. It's like the fire festival. And he gets the diary back, accidentally bumps into Hitler. You're like, shit, Hitler's going to realise it's him. But instead, Hitler just signs autographs Henry Jones's diary, and they get away.
It's such a ridiculous moment, because why is Hitler gonna recognize Indiana Jones? Right? Like, what do we Yeah, but like, what's gonna happen? Like, Hitler's not gonna be like, I know you, Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
And then Indiana Jones and Hitler are gonna have a fist fight in the middle of this,
That'd like, it's just... It turns into like that scene from Troy with Eric Bana and Brad Pitt, and just outside of the castle walls in their underwear, just spearing and shielding each other. Oh, that would have been a good scene. But then, because it's Indiana Jones, he just pulls out a gun and shoots him. Like in It Raiders of the Lost Ark.
There we go.
End of movie.
Take that, Hitler.
So after the run-in with Hitler, they get to an airfield and they buy the first tickets out of Germany, which apparently is on a Zeppelin. There aren't any planes. They get on a Zeppelin. And they basically make their escape, bar a minor run-in with the Nazi officer character that's been chasing them for a while in this movie. And then
no ticket.
Yeah, Indy throws him out of the window, goes, no ticket, and all these Germans are like, oh shit, and they throw away their tickets.
Oh, there's my ticket.
Yeah.
Great moment.
And also in the background of that scene, I had to stop because there's a sign on the wall that says Funk Station. And I was like, Funk Station? There's a funk station in this Zeppelin? And apparently it just means radio station in German, but it's spelt Funk Station. And I just love the idea if you go through that door and there's all these like guys in Nazi uniforms wearing like fake afro wigs and just like grooving to like Soul Train or something. That would have been amazing.
You can just imagine this Nazi guy going, hello and welcome to Funk Funk, because the radio channels are also called Funk.
Oh, I wish that maybe if I knew an animator, I'd pay them just to animate that scene for me. That'd be so much fun. But anyway, so all of that backstory. But then the Zeppelin takes off, and Indy and Henry can finally just chill out and sit and enjoy the journey. And they have that moment that we said about them just briefly discussing the fact that they both doinked the same Nazi, which is funny. Yeah. And then there's a pause, and Indy says, remember the last time we had a quiet drink? I had a milkshake. Henry says, what did we talk about? Indy says, we didn't talk. We never talked. Bit of a pause. Henry says, do I detect a rebuke? Which is a great sentence. I love that. Mm-hmm. A regret. It was just the two of us, Dad. It was a lonely way to grow up. For you too. If you'd been an ordinary average father like the other guys' dads, you'd have understood that. Henry says, actually, I was a wonderful father. What? Did I ever tell you to eat up, wash your ears, go to bed, do your homework? No. I respected your privacy and I taught you self-reliance. I taught you self-reliance.
That's good.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who had been dead for 500 years in another country. And I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years. And this is one of my favourite lines in this bit of dialogue. Henry says, you left just when you were becoming interesting. That's harsh. Dad? And then Henry says, oh no, I'm here now. What do you want to talk about? And this kind of catches Indy off guard, and he can't really find any words, and he says, I can't think of anything. Then what are you complaining about? We have work to do. And then they get back into their kind of shared interest. The only thing that really lights Henry up when he's kind of, now that he's in Indy's life and in going through all the adventures and stuff that he doesn't really seem comfortable with. Like even when he rescues him from the castle, Indy mows down a bunch of Nazis and Henry's like, I can't believe you just did that. It's like, they were
Yeah.
fucking Nazis. Chill out. And it's when he kind of scoots around the table and they start talking about the diary again that he actually connects with him. He's not interested in talking about anything else besides I was going to say the adventure, but it's not the adventure, it's just the study and coming up and working together to help solve a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the only slight mistake I think that you made in your transcription was one of my favourite lines in this bit, which is when Henry says, "Actually, I was a wonderful father." And Indy says, "When?" And I think in your one you wrote, "What?" Actually, I was a wonderful father. What? But in the movie, I'm sure Indy says, "When?" I think that's such a brilliant moment because Indy's not caught by surprise, right? He's not surprised that his father thinks that he was a good father. He's ready to have conflict over this. He's like actually challenging him. He's not like, "I can't believe you think you were good." It's like, "Actually, I was a wonderful father. When were you a wonderful father?" Right? "Give me the example of when you were a good father to me." And his father can't think of one. Right? He can't go, "Remember when we did this?" It's, "Oh, well, I didn't tell you to do anything. I left you on your own to take care of yourself."
Which to him is what makes him a wonderful father. He thinks that was a good move. I think that was all premeditated. That's what he meant to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think this moment of conflict between them and Sean Connery's inability to connect to Indiana Jones, because really, if we're being honest, the character is called Sean Connery and his son is called Indiana Jones. So it's that great moment towards the final action scene, the one we've talked about at length with the tank. And Indiana Jones is on the tank fighting the Nazis, and just when you think he's gotten rid of all the Nazis, another van appears with more Nazis, and there's just constant trucks full of Nazis in this scene. They just, whenever you think there's no more Nazis, there's always another Nazi. But he goes there to rescue his father. He gets his father out of the tank, but then the tank drives off the cliff, and with Indiana Jones on top. And Sean Connery looks down, thinking that his son is dead, and speaks like the only words of love that he's ever given to his son, essentially. And he is full of regret in that moment of he never fully expressed to his son how much he loved and cared for him, and now the moment's gone and there's nothing he can do about it.
I agree that moment's really great because I think he says I've lost him, and the realization hits him, and then he says, "And I never taught him anything," or is that I never told him anything, I never taught him anything. But either or, even though he's fully aware that he imparted a lot of knowledge onto his son in terms of teaching him about history and all that stuff, Indy's obviously taken that on, but in that true moment of loss, he realizes he didn't teach him anything. He didn't tell him anything about anything important. All he did was teach him treat him like a student or a puppy that needs to be trained. Never told him anything, and then he says 5 minutes would have been enough, which is I took from that 5 minutes is long enough to say, "I love you, I'm proud of you, and you've done so many great things, and thanks for rescuing me, and let's compare notes on that Nazi chick." Oi, oi. Maybe not. But yeah, that's a really poignant moment. But then if I can actually find a fault in this movie, it might be there where maybe if this was being made in the modern day, they would make that feel more real. And I don't know if, like we said about Steven Spielberg's family adventure movies, you don't really feel like there's any real threat on the heroes because you know they're the heroes and they're going to make it through to the end. That's not really under any threat. Whereas I would have liked that moment to be a bit more poignant, and you can believe that Indy went over the edge because immediately just the way it's framed, the way the score goes, and the way it's built up, and you watch the tank go over the edge. No part of the way that's filmed it's trying to make you think that Indy was on that.
Yeah.
Like you see like the little mannequin of the Nazi guy who's still on the tank and gets like squished by the turret and stuff. So you don't really believe that Indy's gone, but then you have a chance for the actors to make us believe that perhaps Indy is gone. And maybe it would have been a bit hammy and a bit over the top if Sean Connery had played that really as a tear-jerking moment. But, I think it still works as a quiet reflection, and maybe it's quite true to his Henry Jones's character. If he had single tear, what have I done? I've wasted my life kind of thing. Maybe that would have been too much. But I would have liked that. That would have been a real daddy issues moment if that brought a tear to my eye, which I think it had the potential to do, but it doesn't. Which is fine, because I think what they're not going for that. I think they're playing it as a joke. It's a bit of comedy where they're all looking over the edge, thinking Indy's gone. Even like supposedly his best friend Marcus doesn't seem that cut up about it. Salah is doesn't look completely cut up about it. He's the kind of character. He's from that part of the world where I would have thought he would have fallen to his knees and screamed no to the heavens if a close friend of his had been killed in front of him. But they're all just kind of peering over the edge, and then Indy manages to clamber back onto the cliff, and he's leaning over with them, and there's Sean Connery does the double take.
Yeah, Harrison Ford gives one of his few Han Solo facial expressions within Indiana Jones. It's a look straight out of a Han Solo, where he's looking down. They're all looking down at the tank, and he's kind of like, his mouth's a little bit agape, and his eyes are wide, and he's kind of looking down like, what? And it's the same kind of thing that Han Solo does a lot to Princess Leia whenever she kind of, especially in Empire Strikes Back, where she's kind of like poking him and teasing him, and he's just playing it up. But he doesn't do. You don't see many shared facial expressions between Indiana Jones and Han Solo. Like, they're as similar as they are. Well, they're not really similar, other than them being Harrison Ford. Character-wise, they're both rogues, but Indiana Jones isn't really a rogue.
No, I think he does a great job of distinguishing the two, actually. Because he did those roles in quite quick succession, or maybe even they overlapped at some point. But I think he does a great job of carrying himself differently in each role. Like, he doesn't look like Han Solo dressed like a cowboy, and Han Solo doesn't look like Indiana Jones in a vest. I think there's some credit should be given for how he manages to separate two roguish action heroes from each other.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true.
But there is a nice. We do get a kind of a moment where Sean Connery realizes that Indy didn't go over the edge and gives him a big hug. I thought I'd lost you, boy, and it's a very brief moment of, joy and relief that is, but then very quickly erased and replaced with a stiff upper lip. All right, then, well done. Let's go. Things to do.
Yeah.
Which again is played for comedy, not really played for emotion.
Yeah, that scene is definitely played for comedy. Yeah, which kind of leads us then into the final father-son sequence, which is the whole finale. Really, the whole finale and the tension of the final act of the film is based on they're there to get the Holy Grail. I don't know if we've even mentioned the Holy Grail yet.
We did
in this podcast. Oh, thank God. They're there to get the Holy Grail. But there's a sequence of Indiana Jones style traps that nobody has been able to get through yet. So to ensure that Indiana Jones has the proper motivation to get the Grail, the American jerk, is it Donovan, something like that?
Yeah.
Who's been working with the Nazis? He shoots Sean Connery and says, "Well, Indiana Jones, your father's going to die. So unless you can get the Holy Grail and save him from near death, you're going to lose your dad. So you better go and get me that goddamn Grail." And so the whole climax of the movie is built on the strength of that father-son relationship that we've seen throughout the movie, where the stakes are he's going to lose the father, that they've just started to connect, and we've just seen that. I think so.
I didn't really get that. I didn't feel that. I feel like if Indiana Jones' dad wasn't there, and the American bad guy shot one of Indy's other companions in the stomach, he would have gone in. I think he's an altruistic hero, so I didn't. Obviously, he reacts.
I don't think he would have given it to the Nazis, right? If he'd been like, "Oh, I'm going to shoot the German lady," well, they've already used her as a hostage once.
Yeah,
haven't
it
they?
turned out that she was in. That's when they revealed the big secret that she was a Nazi. She never said. But no, I just don't. I think it's more of. It says more about Indiana Jones's character as the protagonist, and as we know him from throughout the movies, that he does the right thing. He saves people, and especially if they're on his side. Like, say they shot John Rhys Davies in the stomach, that would have been, as I felt, that would have been equal a motivation for him to go in. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't a daddy issues moment for me.
Okay.
That was just like they needed to motivate. Well, as far as the bad guys was concerned, they needed to motivate him to go and do it. And he's the only one who could do it, so that was going to work. What
were there any moments in that sequence that were daddy issues moments for you? In the getting the Grail, that kind of moment?
I don't think they intentionally pull on any of my heartstrings. I don't think they really pull on any heartstrings throughout that sequence. I was watching that sequence thinking that if Indiana Jones hadn't been raised by Henry Jones, and if he hadn't idolized evil Indiana Jones from his childhood, if he didn't have either one of those things, he wouldn't have made it through the trials. He needed the education he had, that was obviously partly from his father and then partly through the course he chose academically. And if he hadn't lived a life of adventure and he could do action roles on cue to avoid buzzsaws, then he needed both parts equally, which is great, and it makes for it to be more exciting. And I suppose if I wanted to make it more of a father-son thing and really pull on the thread of their relationship, it would have been less actiony and probably therefore less interesting to watch. And it would have been heavily reliant on perhaps things that he had learned from his father throughout the course of this film. It's not really any real payoff. Indiana Jones just does Indiana Jones stuff. Like he would have got through there, if you write Henry Jones Sr. out of the story and replace him with just some other scholar whose diary he has with all the clues of how to get through, Indiana Jones could have got through it in the same way. I think.
Yeah, I think the trick that Spielberg pulls off very nicely there is while Sean Connery is on the floor dying, he's giving the penitent path bit.
Yeah, the penitent man will pass.
Yeah, yes, and we cut back and forth between Indiana Jones thinking out loud. It's like, the penitent man kneels before God. He's humble, or something like that. Yeah. But we cut back and forth between father and son, as they're both. It's like almost Sean Connery speaking in tongues as he's bleeding out. He's obsessed with the things that he's learned and that he's read.
Yeah, but which he said that he had forgotten earlier on in the movie. Do you remember?
Yeah, well, he had a chance to reread the diary. He read the diary.
Okay, that's fair point. That could have happened off camera.
Yes, yeah, but I think that's a kind of Spielbergian trick there to build that connection between the two of them in our mind, is them both saying the same thing, right? Is that we know that they're father and son because they're helping. It feels like Sean Connery's helping him, even though he's not, because they can't hear each other. Yeah, they can't help it. But yeah, I think you make a really good point. If Indiana Jones had been shot and Sean Connery had gone in there, even though he could have worked out, it means I have to pray before God, he still would have got his head chopped off because he couldn't move fast enough.
Yeah.
Right? He's a scholar, as you said. He's an academic. He's not a grave robbing action hero. Yeah, in the same way that Indiana Jones is. But yeah, I do think that's a really great filmmaking technique, cutting back and forth between them, because it constantly reminds us of the stakes that Henry Jones is bleeding out, and Indiana needs to get his shit on, get in there and get the Grail. It doesn't just leave us to go, oh yeah, his dad, something about his dad. We're always there with the stakes in mind. And yet it gives us that trick of, you know, there's a stronger connection between them than there otherwise might be.
I didn't. Did you feel like though there was much of a ticking clock there? Because like you say, Henry's lying there and he's been shot and he's bled presumably, but I didn't feel like there was, besides Marcus running up to the entrance of the trials and saying you've got to hurry. Like there in Sean Connery's performance, or not, I don't want to maybe don't put it on Sean Connery because I think he's amazing in this whole film. He's absolutely brilliant. They couldn't have cast anybody else; it wouldn't have been as good. But in maybe that was cut for time, but then I didn't feel that there was a ticking clock. There wasn't enough. I don't know what the word is. There was no tension for me. There was no come on, you've got to hurry up kind of feeling, like, you know, like have you seen Argo, the Ben Affleck movie about the the ending of that? I think I forgot. I know it's a very different type of movie, but just as an example of managing tension, the last 15-20 minutes of that film, I don't think I breathed. I think I was just holding my breath like and just clenching every muscle in my body because it was that dramatic and that tense. And with Indiana Jones, you probably can't go that far, but again, if I'm searching for daddy issues moments, I needed more pressure on Indy to do it quicker. It felt like he had enough time to figure everything out. You know?
Yeah, I feel the pressure during that sequence until he passes the tests and gets into the final room with the Holy Grail in it and the knight. And as soon as we get into that room, it's like time has frozen, right? Indiana Jones isn't in a hurry to get the Grail once he's in that room, because the movie wants to take time for us to be awed by the knight. He's been there for 700 years. We have to see again. We have to have the stakes of what if you choose the wrong Grail, where Donovan gets that brilliant bus stop animation kind of moment where he drinks the water from the wrong Grail and then turns into the skeleton, ages rapidly, and
that looks so
horrific.
Amazing. It looks brilliant.
It's horrible. Yeah,
but like
it's
for
really
practical
great.
effects, like I didn't think to look who was responsible for those effects, but it was incredible. Like that is a movie making at its best for that period of time. It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, it is great. But once they get into that bit, I don't feel that the clock is ticking anymore. It's like as you're saying. Well, I feel it when he's going through the tests. But as soon as he's passed the test and he gets in there, it's kind of I feel like it's over. And what a shit deal that knight gets as well. He waits there 700 years for someone to take over for him, and then the first time he sees anyone, they bloody lose the Grail and break the temple.
Yeah. I wondered though if it was going to it would all respawn back into its original place once they left. Once Indy and everyone get out, it just poofs back into where it was, and the knight's like, well, here we go. Other 700 years. But the sad part about that is that when he knows he's too old to fight for his place anymore, so he surrenders. He's like, here's my sword, you have vanquished me. And then he's like, no, you're right, and just because pushes the sword back and is like, listen, I need to get this Grail because of my dad, and there's also a Nazi following me, and then you do get it does take time to let us know what happens if you choose the wrong one. I thought that time is well spent, I thought. And once Donovan gets dead and he chooses the goblet that he does eventually choose, he does look like he's in a rush. He doesn't take time to consider what happened, to even hesitate. He's like, I think I've got the right one. Here's the water. Oh well, bottoms up.
I've got to try it.
He necks it. Things seem to go well. And another sort of editing choice that negates any kind of ticking clock for me is that once we realise that Indy is not going to emaciate, turn into flesh and bone skeleton dust, nothing, that it cuts to him emerging out of the trials and giving to give his dad the cup. So again, there's no real momentum there. It just cuts straight to him from being right at the furthest point away from his dad in the room with all the cups, and then he's hard cut straight back to giving it to him. We already know it's going to work because it didn't kill Indiana Jones.
Yes.
So it kind of I think the finale pays off for Indiana Jones, but I just don't think it pays off for their relationship much, which I didn't realize that kind of at the time, but now we're talking about it. There didn't seem to be much at stake for their relationship either. Like they were never so fractured that there was the conflict between them still existed in the big finale, and it was a burden on either of them.
The most conflict we really get between them is on the Zeppelin. Yeah. And where it's like, you weren't there for me, and then they go, well, you were there for yourself, now let's move on.
Yeah.
And that's the most fractured that they are,
but there's not really a reconciliation between them beyond them both accepting who each other are, and past is the past, let's move on. And the only time we get any sense that Henry Jones regrets the choices he made and how he raised Indy was on that bit where he thinks he's dead. And again, they don't give it the time to really sink in before Indy pops back up and he's like, so what are we looking at?
Yeah.
So as much as I really enjoy, throughout the course of the film, I really enjoy the back and forth. I think they play off each other brilliantly. They were obviously cast very well to be able to. I think Gregory Peck was one of the first choices to play Henry Jones initially, but he wouldn't have had the sort of comedy chops to be able to pull off the kind of bumbliness of Henry Jones, I think.
Yes.
And I know that Sean Connery was really thrilled when he read the script because he got to be funny, which he didn't get that many chances to do throughout his career. But from what I saw from Last Crusade, he's great at it.
He's brilliant.
He's absolutely brilliant. Everything. There are moments that I really laughed out loud. And if we can hark back to one just now while it's in my head, where they're in the castle when Indy goes to rescue his dad, and they get captured and they're tied to each other, where they kind of, as the audience, we get an idea that, oh no, we've already revealed that they both doinked the Nazi lady, and she gives like this is how we say goodbye in Austria, and gives Indy a big smooch, and then the Nazi smacks him around the head and goes, that's how we say goodbye in Germany, through mistakes and hijinks, the room catches fire.
Yes.
And they try and escape through that sort of secret passageway in the fire,
the spinning
fireplace.
Yeah.
And there's a very simple physical comedy of them accidentally triggering the secret door that spins them, and they get turned into like a secret room full of Nazi officers, and it just keeps going, and they end up back in the room where they were. And Henry Jones says, our situation has not improved. And that really made me laugh. That his delivery is so like sarcastic and dry, and really perfect. And he does that. I think he does that throughout really well. And like I say, their banter is brilliant. I don't know where you want to go from here, but there are some other things that I could draw on that I enjoyed about their relationship, even kind of as we've just sort of covered. For me, I didn't find it very fulfilling by the end, but I enjoyed. Did you? Sorry, let's go to you. Did you find the ending fulfilling for them?
I think the two remaining things I really want to get into is through the whole movie. Sean Connery refers to Indiana Jones as Junior. Through the whole movie.
Do you want to know how many times he says it? Because I counted.
No, I don't want to.
Okay, fine.
I don't want to know that.
You don't have to.
Go on then.
No, I don't think you do. It's fine.
Okay, fine. It's not important. No, go on. I need to know now.
He says it 13 times. He just yells.
I don't know if that's more or less than I thought. Did you count
lot.
how many times? Did you count how many times Indiana Jones says "Dad"? Because that was one thing I messaged you about, wasn't it? How he's always saying "Dad."
You messaged me that beforehand, and I planned on counting them, and that was the one repeated phrase that I forgot to count. I counted "It Belongs in the Museum," and I counted "Junior," and I counted "Don't Call Me Junior," and I counted "This is Intolerable," which are all the catchphrases that I noticed seem to be repeated. But "Dad" or "Come on, Dad," I forgot to count. So I'm sorry, and that was the whole reason I started counting things in the first place.
Well, now I have the script up on my computer, and I've done a Control F for how many times each word appears in the script.
Okay.
So this isn't a perfect thing. Junior appears in the script 19 times.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily every time Sean Connery's saying it. That could be any time that somebody says it.
Yeah.
Dad appears 66 times.
66.
So
See, that sounds like a lot of...
Yeah, so that might be someone going, "Where's your dad?" or something like that. But here's the one that's just appeared. As Indy runs from the railroad tracks and approaches his house, we see the name Jones painted on the mailbox. Indy, "Dad!" Interior, the house, day. Indy bursts through the front door. "Dad!" And he just keeps going. He just kind of keeps going. But yes, he's oh no, okay, no, sorry, I'm being distracted by the script. Edit that out. We get, at the end of the movie, we get the reveal for what Junior actually meant. And we find out that Indiana Jones isn't called Indiana Jones at all. He's actually called Henry Jones Jr., but named himself Indiana because he loved their dog, who had been named Indiana.
Yeah. Who was named Indiana after George Lucas's dog, Indiana.
Right. So it's a funny little moment. It's their last bit together. What do you make of that twist at the end of the movie?
In terms of whether I like it as a element of his character?
Yes, or... of his character and their relationship and everything.
I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, thinking about it, in how estranged he is from his dad. Mm-hmm. And it'd be interesting to know when he took on the name. Oh, no, because in the prelude at the beginning, River Phoenix's fat friend calls him Indiana.
Yes.
In a real like expositionary way where they creep in and find these guys raiding this tomb, and his friend's like, Indiana. So as the audience were going, so who's he supposed to be?
Who's
then?
that River Phoenix?
Yeah. Oh, who's he playing?
Oh, he's only
Indiana.
Yeah,
so even it seems like even as a teenager, he was going by Indiana to his friends. And when we see him run back into the house, they have a dog on the floor which watches him run in. So presumably he was going by Indiana at the same time as they had a dog called Indiana, which must have been kind of confusing. Like, they didn't even do it like in memoriam of a dog that may have passed on. Like, we're led to believe that they're the same, one and the same. Beautiful dog, though. I really like that dog.
Very well, thank you for listening to us.
Let's wrap it up there.
Yeah, we've got a new podcast called Dave Loves That Dog, where we look at the dogs that Dave loves in popular culture.
It sounds more like an Instagram account, but maybe I can make that happen.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a weird twist they're throwing in at the end, but it gives them one final comedic like banter between themselves. And I get the feeling, I think we definitely get the feeling after this one, that when they go back to America to resume their normal lives, that their relationship has mended somewhat, and that they will spend time together and enjoy spending time together as well. Like, their relationship's healed much more by the end of the movie. Like, but at the beginning in the castle, if they'd just gotten out of the castle and gone back to America, I don't think they would have seen each other again. But I do feel that they have been on some form of journey together, so that by the end they are father and son, no longer estranged. Like, they have discovered each other, and it hasn't had the emotional beats necessarily in as you're saying, but it's a great odd couple. Like in the 1980s, it's up there with all the best 1980s buddy cop style movies, right? Like those misfit duos and
like Midnight Run and
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah. All the ones where a white guy and somebody who's not a white guy are forced together. Although I suppose Midnight Run, they were both white guys. But I read, this is a bit of a tangent, but I read something about how the buddy cop film can't work anymore because they've gone through the list of all of the crazy combinations that could possibly occur of white cop and fill in the blank. So like white cop and white criminal, like and like Midnight Run, and white cop and black criminal, like 48 Hours, or white cop, black cop, white cop and a woman. They've even done white cop and a dog with Canine and Turner and Hooch. So I guess white cop, old white cop is kind of like what this is.
Yeah, well, that's why they have to be archaeologists, because they're not cops, so you can get away with
cops. You can get away with it. But their dynamic does work brilliantly. I think, and I said it before, that the performances sell it.
Yeah, definitely. And there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and I just remembered what it was.
Well done.
It's Henry Jones, Sean Connery's approach to violence.
Okay.
And how we were saying earlier on about the differences between Indiana Jones and Sean Connery. The biggest one for me is, like you were saying with the Nazis in the castle, Indiana Jones just mows them down, and Sean Connery is like, you killed them. And then later on during the motorcycle chase, there are a few moments where Indiana Jones maybe doesn't kill them, but I think he kills them. He kills some Nazis on motorbikes, and then he's got a big smile on his face, like, yeah, I did it. And then he looks over to Sean Connery, and Sean Connery's very disapproving that he just killed this guy.
Yeah, and one time he just like checks his watch, like he couldn't be less interested in what's going on.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a really interesting character difference. That everything we take for granted about Indiana Jones being an action character isn't necessarily a good thing. And we think it's a good thing because he's the protagonist of our story and they're Nazis. But when we see his father being disapproving, we realise that violence isn't... It's kind of a weird thing of being like, violence isn't always, like we think, they're Nazis and they've been shot by the hero, so that's good. But Sean Connery...
justified, yeah.
But Sean Connery's like, you just killed them! And there's a weird moral switch in the back of my mind that's going, yeah, did he have to, But then in the next scene, where the Nazi colonel has the girl that they've both had sex with hostage, Sean Connery's like, yeah, just shoot her. She's a Nazi.
Yeah, they literally leave the room where Indiana Jones machine guns a bunch of them.
Yeah,
and they walk into the next room, and he's like, "Yeah, execute her. I don't care.
Yeah, shoot that girl. I don't mind.
She's definitely a Nazi.
Yeah,
that is a strange thing. But then in that motorbike chase, the disapproval I don't necessarily attribute to him being like, "You hurt people. It doesn't matter that they're Nazis. You shouldn't be so aggressive." I attribute it to I think it's just the exuberance to which Indiana Jones takes this violence and aggression and how good he is at it. That I think Henry Jones is just not impressed. It's not the kind of thing that impresses him. So there's a bit where like he sticks a spike through the spokes of a motorbike and the guy goes flying and Indy's like, "Hey, that was awesome!" Yeah, and Henry's like, "Ugh, not interested." But I think it's like there are three main moments of violence from Indiana Jones in that sequence. First one, he was pleased with himself. I can't even remember what it is, but the first one, he's pleased with himself. Dad is not interested. The third time is the spokes one, and again, Dad's not interested. But the middle one is when Indy grabs like a flagpole and uses it as a joust.
Yeah.
And Henry Jones actually seems impressed by that. He smiles at that. And I'm like, well, is that because it's like a historical reference? Like, would Indiana Jones not know how to joust had he not studied history? And therefore, Dad can be like, that's my boy.
Yeah, I think that's very true. That jousting bit's very cool as well.
Cool,
yeah. Then we get the bit later on where, because Indiana Jones finds it frustrating that his dad doesn't approve of his violence as well. We see that in the motorbike chase, But then we get the bit later on where they've been chased by the plane in a separate action sequence, but this one that just continues and continues, where they're stuck on the beach. There's nowhere for them to go, and Indiana Jones opens his gun to see if he's got any bullets, but the gun's empty, and he's like, "Well, that's it. We're done for." And then Sean Connery gets out his umbrella and rushes at some pigeons or some seagulls or something.
Seagulls,
and and the gulls crash the plane, basically.
Yeah.
And then Sean Connery quotes Charlemagne and walks off looking proud of himself. And that's where...
I just remembered my Charlemagne.
Yeah, I think that's the first moment that we see Indiana Jones be proud of his father in the movie. Up until
I was going to ask you about that because he does have a look. He just like his dad kind of saunters off with his umbrella on his shoulder, like what's his name, Singing in the Rain.
Gene Kelly.
Gene Kelly, yeah, like Gene Kelly, just like looking real pleased with himself, and India has this kind of like holy shit expression. And I was watching it, and I'm trying to figure out what Harrison Ford is trying to show with that expression, because I didn't find it very transparent. So what is it? Is this like he could very well be thinking, I don't think I really like this in my dad. Like, sure, he saved us, and that was a great bit of intuition and improvisation that is usually a hallmark of Indiana Jones's escapes. But then he doesn't like watch Henry walk away with a huge smile on his face, like, yeah, you get him, Dad. He's more like, huh. I either didn't realise he was capable of this, or I didn't realise he was capable of this, and I'm either not too keen on it, like this is my shtick. I'd rather this be an escort mission where I've got to drag this useless, incompetent NPC around, than I would rather that we were equals. I don't know if Indy really enjoyed that moment much.
See, I take it as the opposite of that, because for me, up until this point, it has been a case of Dad, of him trying to get this buffoon, this bumbling idiot. It's like, take this seriously, right? They're Nazis. We're being chased by Nazis, and you're not even interested. Right, like you don't understand the stakes. We're in Germany, and you want to go to Berlin. Like, take this seriously, right?
To the lion's den.
Yeah, but that's the moment for Indy where he sees. I think the first moment where he sees his father as something other than a burden. To me, that's the moment that's when he can see some of himself in there, but also. Something, as you're saying about that thing about being equals, Indiana Jones on his own would have died in that scene because he wouldn't have thought to have thrown the birds into the air. And so it's not only is his father not the useless bumbling fool that he thought he was, he's got something more to contribute as well. And he has a different way of thinking about the world. And I think that's a really awesome choice there. In a modern movie would have been Indiana Jones cocks open his pistol. He's got one bullet left. He carefully aims and snipes the pilot with his revolver, and it explodes. And his dad's like, all of that with one shot? And you'd be like, oh, this sucks, right? But I think that's a really cool moment.
Yeah, I think it's a great moment. I think it's important, like you say, for Henry not to be a burden the entire time, and to show that he is capable of contributing. Yeah. But I'm glad I brought it up because I can see what you mean, and I wasn't sure on first viewing, but you're probably right.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, and it develops too, because then when later on, when we're on the tank sequence we spoke about earlier, initially, Indy again is just sort of treating his dad like carry on, and when he wants to run in to rescue Marcus from the tanks, he's there with Indy's there with his dad and with Salah, and he wants his dad just to stay put, just stay here. I'll go do the rescue, then I'll I'll get some horses,
Yeah.
and we'll come back and get you, and then we'll fuck off. Indy, goes off to do his thing, but then Henry decides he's going to get involved too, and then he's the one who does most of the rescuing of Marcus. Like he somehow gets into the tank, and he's like, "It's a rescue, old boy," and then Marcus becomes the bumbling psychic character in the twosome. So we're used to seeing Indy and his dad have that dynamic, and that dynamic stays the same, except now Henry is the Indy character and Marcus is the Henry character. And I think that's cool. It shows that Henry is more than just the scholar who's there to get in the way. Like, he can be a bit more like Indiana Jones than we thought, and maybe some of Indy's prevalence and predilection for violence and adventure and being a hero maybe did come from his dad after all, or the opposite, and that Henry's been inspired by Indy despite seeming disapproving previously. Maybe he got a little bit of a taste of action with the seagulls thing, and now he's like, yeah, I can see the value in this now, and I'm gonna help. I'm not just gonna sit and be rescued. I'm gonna do the rescuing.
Yeah, I think we've missed what may actually be the defining moment of their relationship in this, and we spoke about maybe it's when Indy's fallen off with the tank and they think he's dead, and we get to see his father open up. But I think the defining point of their relationship is the bit that made me unintentionally laugh out loud. Well, I sent you a message as well saying, see if you can spot the bit where I unintentionally laughed out loud. And it's they've got the Holy Grail, they've healed Sean Connery, and then Nazi woman picks up the Grail. Elsa picks up from Frozen, picks up the Grail, and she's like, "It's ours, Indy, yours and mine. Don't you see what this is? We'll be rich." And then she steps over the seal that the knight said, "Don't go over the seal with the Holy Grail because it'll ruin everything."
Was there.
She was in the room, but she does it anyway. And Indy's like, "Don't step over the seal." So she does. And then the floor starts to crack open. And the bit that makes me laugh is the crack kind of forms through the middle of the seal. And we obviously need the Nazi lady and the Holy Grail to become imperiled. So what the actress does is jump directly in the middle of this crack. And I thought it was the funniest thing in that movie. Because it's supposed to look like, oh no, the ground is shaking and I'm being thrown in this, but it doesn't. She is clearly being told, now if you just jump into the gaping maw, then it's ridiculous. Anyway.
She practically bats the the Grail into it as well.
Yeah,
it's the worst, it's the worst fumble I've ever seen.
If that was on the American football field, she is not getting picked next week. She's not starting, that's for sure. But she falls down into the gaping maw, as does the Grail, because she threw it down there, and she leapt into the hole. But Indiana Jones saves her, and he's like, give me both your hands, and I can pull you up. But she looks down and she sees the Grail, and she's like, I can reach it, right? I can get the Grail, and then we'll have the prize. And her greed and her selfish nature means that Indy can't keep hold of her, and she falls to her death. Then Indy all tumbles in after her in trying to rescue her, and ends up in exactly the same situation. He can see the Grail, he can almost reach it, but his dad has him by the hand. And his dad, who dedicated his entire life, who dedicated his relationship with his wife, who died. She knew that he was more obsessed with the Grail than he was invested in her and their son. His entire life's goal is falling down in front of him, but he chooses his son over his life's obsession. And that's, I think, the defining moment, because he says to Indy, leave it.
Let it go, yeah.
Yeah, because if this was the beginning of the movie, it would have been Indiana Jones is trying to get up, and his dad's like, no, the Grail, get the Grail. Right? Yeah. Like, if this had taken place like a month before, then his dad would have been like, no, you have to get it, that's my life My life is there right in front of me. The sign of God that he tells his son, leave it. And they,
that might
they
still be
come up
true.
together.
What you were just saying, my life is in front of me, like evidence of God.
Yeah.
That's true. It's Indy.
Yeah.
He's there.
Yeah.
Like he felt about the Grail is what he realizes is how he feels about him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's like the defining moment of their relationship. Like that's one of the emotional beats, and it's also a great beat for Indiana Jones, because if we forget Temple of Doom, really, because that was supposed to be a prequel anyway, the character arc of Raiders till now is the story of Indiana Jones versus the Nazis, right? But the Nazis also kind of substitute greed and lust for power, and like they didn't have to be the Nazis. Nazis are just perfect villains. But Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark refuses to destroy the Ark of the Covenant because it's the Ark of the Covenant, right? He's like, and I'm gonna get the Ark of the Covenant. He could destroy it to keep it out of the hands of the Nazis, but he refuses, and in the end, the Nazis destroy themselves anyway, because as with Elsa, in any Spielberg movie, those who lust for power and lust for greed are doomed by it. Like it's Jurassic Park, it's the Nazis in Indiana Jones. It's that same Spielberg kind of trope. But Indiana Jones won't destroy the Ark of the Covenant, but it's only when his father tells him this is not the most important thing that he's willing to let it go, and he does.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's that kind of circle complete of their relationship. I think that's that's true. He does learn from his father in that respect, because he never even wanted to go after the Grail in the first place. No, he says you've got the wrong Jones.
Yeah, exactly. When the thingy comes after him, and the rich Donovan guy, which by the way, I was watching this with my girlfriend and she'd never seen it before, and as soon as Donovan was there and he was showing Indy the tablet and was telling him about the mission, she was like, he's going to be the bad guy. I was like, really? I think maybe she's just spoiled as a modern film viewer that it seems obvious now, and she did pick up on it very quickly. Credit to her. But you've got the wrong Jones. The only reason he goes on this quest is because his dad was the first choice and was brought on board, but has gone missing. So he's not really interested in the Grail as much as he is in finding his dad. Which actually, thinking about it, is kind of antithetical to his character. I suppose he might have just as an equal interest in recovering antiquities as he does in rescuing his dad who's in peril. Yeah,
but he gets very into the Grail search when they're in Venice. Like, to begin with, he's like, I don't really know anything about the Grail. Like, I don't even know if it exists in truth. But then once they're in Venice and they're in that church trying to find the X marks the spot moment, like, Indiana Jones is into this. Right?
He smashes the floor of like a 1,000-year-old church just because he's got a hunch that this is where they need to be.
And the number of times he has, it's like a classic, to me, classic Indiana Jones moment where he's with Elsa and Marcus, and it's a classic, don't you know what this means moment, which is, I'm so excited and clever, and I'm a super genius who just worked this out, and you haven't caught up to it yet. And this kind of enthusiastic arrogance. Don't you know what this means? Like, I understand what this means, but why are you two so slow? And the only person who can keep up with Indiana Jones is his dad, which is why Marcus is kind of an embarrassment. Like, but when his dad comes into his own, they're a great team. Those two.
They are, and that's and it's when I think it's when Indy rescues his dad, and he mentions that he's figured out the city because his dad had drawn the map of how to get from an unknown location
to
the canyon of the crescent moon to the Grail, but he just didn't know where to start. And when Indy comes in and says, Alexandretta, we figured out Alexandretta, the joy in Henry's face, he's like, of course, yes, Alexandretta. And they bond even though they've not barely spoken in 20 years, they both get excited about this thing. They're like Elsa says, Giddy is a schoolboy.
Yeah.
And I think she repeats that, doesn't she? When
Yes.
Indy's doing like the rubbing on the shield of the knight underneath underneath that church. There, Giddy is a schoolboy. So they have so much in common that it's strange that they were so estranged for so long. If you don't take into consideration kind of the emotional neglect that may have occurred throughout his childhood.
Yeah. So jumping on to how this connects us to our parents, and how do you see yourself and your relationship with your dad in Indiana and Henry Jones?
Did you have a hiccup then?
I did. It was a little bit of a fish finger sandwich burp.
Oh, lovely. I don't know. I think I don't find it easy to relate to their relationship. Henry is very much so focused on his own interests and his own endeavors and what his life's work is, that he doesn't give more than a sort of a cursory attention to Indiana. He seems like he's raising more of a progeny than he does a son. As we've spoken about in previous episodes, where some of these fictional dads we've spoken about are all about the love. That's the opposite with Henry. He's trying to he seems like he's just tried to impart as much knowledge and thirst for knowledge in his offspring as possible without really bothering to raise a person, a human. Indy doesn't seem like they're very personable to him, and I wonder what Indy's relationship with his mother was like. We know she's not in the picture, but for how long before? Do we assume that in that prologue sequence that his mother isn't around then, or she just happens to not be home? I suppose we have to kind of assume that she's already passed away at this point.
Yeah. So,
Indy's been without a dad his entire adult life and most of his childhood. And I've spoken about my dad before, in that he kind of gave up his own personal endeavours and interests and passions for the sake of love and raising a family and being a good dad. When I was quite young, he was quite, not absent, but he was working so much as a policeman that I didn't see him like more than during the week anyway. I'd see him in the evenings, and that was really it. That was quite a short period in my childhood, though, so I don't really see it as being formative. But the strange kind of way that Indiana is both trying to seek approval from his father with his life and his choices in his career, and also saying "fuck you" to his father in his kind of, shall we say, extracurricular endeavors. I think I can kind of relate to that, in that I've always wanted approval from my dad, I think, but more so in just in being a man than in any particular choices or anything that I made. I think I've made selfish choices really throughout my life, and a lot of them were aided by him, either financially or just because he was supportive. But yeah, I've never gone into anything that I thought he would have done if he was in my position, if you know what I mean. I would often seek his advice on things, and if his advice didn't line up with what I wanted to do, it probably wouldn't stop me doing what I wanted to do anyway. So I can get that's something of a rebellious streak, but yeah, Henry and Keith don't have an awful lot of similarities besides being tall and having silver beards and varying degrees of Scottish heritage.
That's good. That's a good connection.
We come from a Scottish clan called the MacLellan clan, whose motto, apparently my dad did some digging, was "While I breathe, I hope."
Oh, and that's nice.
Well, yeah, I think that's really great. And my dad's side of the family isn't particularly diverse, so I think Scotland is about as far as his blood spreads. That's a weird sentence. So he's very proud of that Scottish part of his heritage, whereas my mum, you can go in any direction from where we are now and you'd find some relative of hers probably. So yeah, I wonder if my dad would watch Sean Connery and look up to him. But yeah, I'm afraid that's all I've got this time, Dom.
I think that's a pretty good one. I think, yeah. For me, in my relationship with my dad, I have my dad is a lot of fun, which I can connect to the Sean Connery, Indiana Jones relationship, and I'm not nowhere near as frustrated by my dad as Indiana Jones is in his. Me and dad get on really well and have a lot of fun every time we get together. So, yeah, I get that joy, those moments of joy that we see in Indiana Jones with the two of them. I can definitely relate to that. Interestingly, if I can say that about myself, that dynamic between Sean Connery and evil Indiana Jones, and how Indy kind of becomes a hybrid of the two, I can see in my relationship with my dad and my stepdad, in that they are literally two different father figures, not just like a guy who gives me a hat and then disappears again. But I can see bits of my personality, bits of my character, in terms of like my job. I do a lot of creative stuff, which is more like my dad. But the creative stuff that I do mostly is comics, which comes from my stepdad. So, like, in terms of my creativity, it's definitely from my dad's side. But in terms of where my creative pursuits go, it's towards the area that my stepdad was interested in. So yeah, there's an interesting kind of hybrid there. But I know we're in a bit of a rush. I think it would be amiss of us to not mention the father of an Indiana that we both know very well. While we are
of course.
Here. Right, because our good friend Elliot is the father of a daughter, so really maybe we shouldn't be bringing this up at all. A daughter on daddy issues are ridiculous. No, Elliot and Indiana are very good friends of us. And Elliot's a very interesting figure in my life, at least. I don't know how it is you feel about him. Right, we could bitch about him now and I'll never know. Unless he listens. He won't listen. Because when we first met Elliot, he was definitely more of a Han Solo type character.
He was a lovable rogue.
Yeah, in
Pretty
that
much.
he would lie about almost everything all of the time. And
Yes,
he
would.
Yeah, and it would be like, oh, Elliot, have you seen this movie? Yeah, I've seen that movie. I love that movie. It's the best movie I've ever seen. What's your favourite bit? Because he hadn't seen the movie. But he said that he liked it so that you would like him. Like that. And Elliot was always very desperate for people's love and approval, but hid it under the fact that he's a big, muscly guy covered in tattoos and has lots of, well, at the time, had lots of sex with lots of different women. But again, because he needed somebody to love and approve him. Right? And now that I've had this therapy about Elliot, I can say about his wonderful, amazing daughter, Indiana, who, how old is she now? Was it her fifth birthday? I think.
Embarrassingly, I'm not sure.
I think it was her fifth.
5
no,
or 6.
No.
It's in that
It
area.
was her sixth.
I want to say
birthday.
2014, yeah, so 6.
Yes, her sixth birthday, yes.
Yeah.
A few months ago. And she is wonderful. She is brilliant. She is my favourite child, possibly on the planet. And I'm a teacher, so I know a lot of annoying children. And she is my favourite. And one of the things that fills me with so much joy about going to see them and visit them is the man that Elliot has turned into now that he is a father. Because I loved him back when we used to live with him, loved him completely, but God, he was a prick. Right? And I'll say that full up, like, love him like a brother, genuinely. But he was, he could be difficult, for sure. But now that he's a dad, he's a responsible father. He's a amazing provider. He educates, reads with her, does everything, and as a single dad as well. And he is an inspirational father, I think, and I'm incredibly proud to have him as a friend. And I'm getting a little bit emotional. But
we had to get some fierce emotion in this podcast somewhere.
Yes.
But no, yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it affects me deeper knowing, like you said, where he's come from, and we've kind of witnessed a character arc, a development in him.
Yeah.
And the inciting incident seems to have been having his Indiana.
Yeah.
And Dom's
I'm
crying.
so emotional.
And getting to witness how he is trying to impart what he has learned and his experience and his wisdom onto her. And like Henry Jones, I think he will demand a lot of her educationally. I think he went to so many strides to get her into a really good school and so she can have a best education. And I feel like he has become more of a scholar in his later years. He's always had the brains, but I think his brains were directed elsewhere when he was younger, and I think some insecurities probably took a lot of that attention away. But yeah, how he's bettered himself and educated himself, I think will stand her in very good stead, because he'll look after her for sure.
Yeah, and I think another thing for him as well is how having Indiana has changed his relationship with his parents as well. I think, like, he's got very interesting. His mum is one of my favorite people as well. Actually, I just love his family. I think that the Kings are great. But I think being a parent has changed how he interacts with his parents, and even wanting to interact with his parents. And yes, Indiana is an amazing kid, very cheeky, far too intelligent for her own age. She's beaten the two of us at multiple games, intelligence games.
That's true.
Yeah, and could not be more proud of both of them, really. But that's enough of the soppy stuff. Do you have any idea what you'd like to do for the next episode?
No. Do you? You come up with a lot of these suggestions. I'm not sure if we've done more than one that was my idea.
Yeah, it's your turn.
That's not a
pick
complaint
one,
of mine. That's not a complaint at all. You tend to pick good ones. Maybe I'll go away and I'll come up with something good, but we'll see what we come up with.
Okay, well, if any of the 12 of you who have listened to... Well, if any of the one of you, which will be my dad, who has listened to the end of this episode... I should say Alex Archer, my father, is a regular listener. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I get continuous messages after we do this, like, do you really think that about our relationship? Like, after the last one, he was like, I just listened to it and you said something that was a little bit negative, and I just want to make sure that our relationship is okay. I was like...
bless him, that's so sweet.
I was like, yes, Dad, I love you, Dad. Okay, Dad, like that. He's great.
I'm not sure. My dad will never listen to these. I think partly because he's very busy, and I don't know how he'd find the time to sit down and spend an hour and a half or however long this one ends up being. Listening to me talk about popular culture. I think my mum might have listened to one of our early ones, but I don't know. I think I'm pretty safe. I can say what I want and no one's ever going to go, why did you say that about me?
Yeah, well, in that case, love you, Dad. Thank you for listening. And if you have any suggestions... I love you too,
Alex Archer. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's a lot of love. There's a lot of love going around today. If anyone has any suggestions for future episodes, then put it in the comments below, and we will do it. I'm dying to do our first listener suggested episode. So
that would be good, yeah.
Yeah, when that comes in, that'll be great fun. So thank you for listening. Rest in peace, Sean Connery, legend of the silver screen, and see you next time. Bye.
Adios.